Ryan Glover here, and I wanted to talk about Joe Budden, Young Miami. Young Miami recently was mocking Joe Budden because he received a plaque on his podcast. It was presented by LL Cool J for gold certification for his record Pump It Up, which came out in 2003, which is 21 years ago. And she was basically laughing because of the length of time that it took for him to go gold, which, I would like to point out, as far as, streaming didn't exist then. People were relying on physical sales. Now it's a lot easier. People say, for artists to go platinum, it doesn't mean as much as it did back then. But nonetheless, Young Miami, has a platinum certification for her work with the City Girls. I know definitely for the song Twerk featuring Cardi B. So she had a little assistance there. Also, she sells sexuality in her music. At the end of the day, I think Joe Budden, was a way more talented artist when he made music than Young Miami ever was. And, obviously that's a subjective remark, but Joe Budden was a real MC. And Pump It Up, was a commercial success, obviously, was featured in the movie B2K. And people still, like that song. I don't think that was really reflective of the music that Joe Budden made. Always, his more serious songs, even on his first album, I would say, songs that meant something to me were Calm Down, 10 Minutes. Those are classic material, his more introspective work. Young Miami hasn't, demonstrated that as an artist. And I think, it's a disparity in rap where, people who are real lyricists often, get lumped in with, people who are able to capitalize on gimmicks such as sexuality. Young Miami really needs to humble herself, because if you really look at it, she doesn't have any, certifications as a solo artist, number one. But also, a lot of her success is pretty much being a sex worker, like Lil Rod claimed in the lawsuit for Diddy. She had a podcast which won some awards, but is really only winning awards because of the sexual favors that she's providing for Diddy. And I think that there's real talented artists and people who actually pay dues and don't do all the things behind the scenes, such as the sexual favors, and maybe their career takes a little bit longer. Of course, it's going to take Joe Budden a little bit longer to get recognition for his work because he's not providing sexual favors to artists, and he's relying on his talent. And I think that's the problem with the music industry today, is that a lot of times people aren't taking that into consideration, where it's a lot of artists who are just relying on their industry connections as opposed to their actual talent. And I think there's no shame in Joe Budden receiving an award 21 years later, because Joe Budden deserves that recognition. He was an incredible artist, was signed to Def Jam, and he has a great opinion on hip hop. And I think I respect Joe Budden's opinion. A lot of people, you can see because of the success of the podcast, he keeps it a buck, and people say that he's hating, but people never talk about the industry politics that are behind the scenes that cause some people to be successful. If someone's providing sexual favors for artists, and that helps propel their career, and then it's someone who is just doing the work and making good music, hoping people receive their music. And I think most of the people and stuff and everything who comment about Joe Budden haven't even listened to his music, haven't ever listened to a Mood Music mixtape, or seen the depth of the artist that he is. I think Joe Budden is a great artist, top tier lyricist, and you can't really take that away from him. I think sometimes and stuff, you hear these artists, they come out, they have a hot single, and it's not really the same as someone who like, you know, had a career and a catalog of music, which like, you know, still like, you know, is able to be played 21 years later. Not necessarily Pump It Up. That's not like necessarily like one of my favorite Joe Budden songs. And like, you know, that's the difference too, like, you know, with radio. I feel like a lot of artists sometimes and stuff like, you know, put radio up like here, but like at the end of the day, radio is really for kids. And those are the people who like dictate, like, you know, as far as like, you know, what's popular on the radio. And I'm tired of like, you know, artists like, you know, who are real lyricists like Joe Budden not getting respect. I think like Joe Budden was an incredible artist, and like, you know, he had like, you know, such great catalog of music. I encourage people to check it out. And like, to be mocked by someone who like, you know, isn't a real artist and had to rely on their sexuality to be able to make it in the music industry and not on their talent, you know, it's disappointing. Like, you know, that like, you know, they can be trolled or even like, you know, mocked, or someone can say anything and like you're getting golden showers or whatever, like, you know, to be able to make your way in the music industry. And people never really bring up like, you know, that Joe Budden and Young Miami are not on equal footing. Joe Budden is an incredible lyricist. You know, he made songs that were introspective, that like, you know, help people in their lives. You know, help them that were actually going through things. Like I could listen to like, you know, Calm Down Today, and it's better than like, you know, 90% of the songs on the radio. I could listen to a song like 10 minutes. I feel like, you know, these are like, you know, universal themes that really affected me in my life. And there's other artists and stuff who fit that bill, who make real music. I think like, you know, the real artists need to start getting attention instead of like, you know, people who are like put in this industry because of like, you know, being sex workers, willing to provide sexual favors. The fact that they have to sell sexuality, like I don't see why, like, you know, in hip hop so many women have to rely on their sexuality, basically just being strippers. And it seems like the less attention they get, the more clothes come off, you know. And obviously male artists, like, you know, can't rely on that a whole lot. You know, I think like, you know, obviously like LL Cool J does a little bit of that, but he's a real MC. So like, you know, there's artists and stuff and everything like who are a mixture. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with like sexuality. Obviously sex sells, but sometimes I feel like that's the only thing that artists are offering. You know, I'm talking about like, you know, people like Sexy Red, the Ice Spices of the world. They're not on the same footing or the same plane like as Joe Budden. And like, you know, as far as like, you know, just as far as like male MCs, like they have to rely on their actual talent a lot of times, besides the ones who are willing to like, you know, provide sexual favors, like Young Miami, like, you know, because there's male MCs that have been accused of doing things like that. And I'm sure it happens. It clearly does, you know, especially like, you know, from what we've heard about Diddy and, you know, how he was like, you know, taking advantage of artists. But like, you know, I mean, I applaud Joe Budden because I feel like he's a real thorough person. And the fact, like, you know, that he took like 21 years, like, you know, to get his gold certification, man, that is something to be saluted. And it takes you longer when you're doing things the right way. I think like, you know, a lot of times and stuff and everything, like, you know, people may think like, hey, you know, it's taking me too long. But it's like, you know, you're doing things the right way. You're not scamming. You're not robbing nobody. You're not cheating. You're not selling yourself, your body, your soul. And that's like, you know, what people like Young Miami are doing. And, you know, at the end of the day, the joke's on her. Because, like, you know, she's, like, you know, one who's, like, getting golden showers or whatever, like, you know, sexually benefits that she got from dealing with Diddy. And, you know, like, I think a lot of times and stuff and everything, like, you know, artists and stuff engage in these and then they have buyer's remorse, you know. So I think just don't sell your soul, sell your body to get where you want, because it's probably not worth it. And a lot of times, like, you know, I feel like in our society, they try to promote that, like, you know, like it's such a good thing. But at the end of the day, man, like, you know, rely on your talent. If your talent can't get you there, you probably shouldn't be there. And so, Ryan Glover, man, like, comment, subscribe. YouTube, Ryan Glover 5129. Instagram, Ryan Glover 187. Twitter, Ryan Glover 1982. Let me know in the comments what you think.